Hey guys, this is Small Pairs for HUSNG.com. I'm doing part two of a two-part series for player Kitten odds. If you saw the last video, it was up for free. Basically, what we learned about Kitten odds is so far he seems to be the type of player that likes to base the size of his bet sizing off the strength of his hand, which is a pretty big leak. And going in, we're going to use those reads, and also we have reads that he's capable of trapping, like limping. He limped queens once at 75 big blinds and again at 20 big blinds. So we're going to watch for him trapping and giving away the strength of his hand based on his sizings. This first hand came in a little late, but this is the first hand of the match. A 3x pre he called, and he called a half pot c-bet. When we get to the turn, I think it's a lot of 7x and 8x, and some straight draws and flush draws. We have the blocker to the diamond flush draw, so it should be less than normal on the flush draws. When the turn comes, we could barrel. We're still ahead of some of the draws that are going to be calling. However, I decided to check and try and just get the showdown with my ace high, and ended up timing out and checking back the turn, which I was going to do anyway, I think, and he leads full pot on the river. From what we've seen so far, he's definitely capable of doing this with his 7x and 8x hands, and then he could probably do it with his missed draws as well. So it's a decent spot to bluff catch with our ace high. However, I've seen him turn showdown value into a bluff with these big sizings before, that I think that this is not the best type of player to bluff catch in this spot against. So I ended up deciding to go ahead and fold, which I think is hopefully the better decision than calling. But I think the two are pretty close in EV. And I think if you do decide to call here, you see a lot of bluffs. Raising is an option. However, we're not really repping very much, but I don't know how much he thinks about that. I didn't think about raising in game. It's a decent option. King 7 of hearts. We're going to 3x the big blind. Go ahead and build the pot with our king high flush draw. He ends up folding. So far, he's playing a little over 50% of hands out of position, so I'm going to be opening around 80, 90%. I'm probably not going to go over 90% unless I see him folding more than 50% of the time out of position. Queen 9 off on this flop. I think check calling is our worst option. I think check raising is a decent option. There's a lot of good turns and rivers that we can barrel on. He should fold a lot of the time. And I think check folding is an okay option as well, just giving up. It's pretty early on in the match, and I find that players call down bluffs more often earlier in the match. I don't know if that's true for the population in general. I'd actually like to hear some of you guys' thoughts on that. But I think for sure, like within the first and the second hand, people have less of a fold button than they normally do. He men raises here, which is kind of interesting. I think he's mostly been 3xing, so based on the general theme, we're going to assume it's a weaker hand than normal, which means it should connect to this board pretty well. But we connected pretty well with our two overs to second pair and gut shot straight draw. I think check calling is an okay option. However, his two barrel percentage is 67% at this point. That I expect he could be barreling on the turn a lot for wide value and with a lot of his draws. So I want to go ahead and check raise and steal the initiative. I think that's the best option for this hand, given the information that we have. And considering that I'm planning on barreling, I don't mind check raising a little bit smaller and get called by a wide range early, and then fold him out on later streets. Unfortunately, the 7 of diamonds falls on the turn, which is one of the worst cards for us. It takes away a lot of our fold equity, and it hits his perceived range pretty hard. That I think that our best option here is just to give up and check fold. If I had like a higher diamond, like then I could see continuing to barrel. But even if we get there with our flush, how much value are we going to get with the 8, and then it's going to be really hard to fold, that we might be value owning ourselves I think given how bad this turn card is, I think it's best for us to just check fold, which we end up doing. And I don't expect him to be bluffing there very often. Um, Ace five, I like to 2.5x a lot of the time. Encourage calls from a wider range. We're going to be ahead most of the time on the flop with our ace high, so we don't mind if he adds a few hands to his calling range because we're raising smaller. But he continues to play pretty tight out of position. Pocket sixes, go ahead and 2.5x. The big blind, make it 50. All right, so he three bets to 150. So it's 100 more for us to call, and we have 1100 behind. So our implied odds are 11 to 1. Versus this player, I think we need about 13 or 14 to 1 implied odds in order for us to call to try and hit a set. And we're not getting that. So that means calling is out of the option for us. So we either need to go all in or not all in 4-bet or fold. I think this player's so far his 3-bet percentage is 12.1%. That it could almost you could definitely make an argument for folding because of how tight his 3-bet range is. That I think it's just going to be pretty rare that we're ahead. I decided to take a different option here and go ahead and give him the chance to make as many mistakes as possible. I made a really goofy sized large 4-bet that leaves him the option to flat, and then if he's bad enough, possibly check fold some flops. I think it. Um, I think there's not much difference in this and just going all in. But given his ability to make some pretty big mistakes, I think this is going to be the optimal play. He ends up having pocket tens, so he's definitely never folding those there. It will be interesting to see if he would have check folded if the flop was like ace, queen, king. He might possibly just get frustrated and check fold, which would be a really big mistake on his part and justification for our play. So he takes that in that match, and we get a rematch from him. Um, so we get a second shot at him. I might. I'd like to see myself open up my opening range almost to 100%, um, because of how often he seems to be folding out of position and how tight his 3-bet range is. So he clicks it back on us here, which I've never really seen from him before, and I don't view it as very strong. I actually think I'm still probably ahead of most of his range with ace nine off here, and I think he's just kind of trying to steal the initiative. So when people try and do that, and I think they do it a lot early on, I just take the initiative right back from him and click it back. It's only 40 more chips, and the one nice thing it does is that you know that he's probably going to 5-bet with like aces, kings, queens, jacks, tens, ace king, ace queen. All those hands are probably going to 5-bet. So when he flats, he's actually kind of capping his range a little bit. So I'm putting him on like ace jack, queen jack, king queen, king 10, king 9, queen 9, a lot of hands like that. And versus that range, we're doing pretty well. That I think we can definitely make this call. And it's important to note his bet sizing as well. He's not betting full pot, which takes a lot of 10x out of his range, because he bets based on the strength of his hand. So he's really weighting himself towards 9x and draws here, which just makes it easier for me to call down. On the river, he checks. I think it's really thin to try and get value. We're basically just trying to get value from like king 9 or queen 9, and I think that's just too small of part of his range to advocate for a value bet there. And I think checking back is fine. 8-9, we'll go ahead and 2.5x. Don't mind playing versus a wide range. He continues to play pretty tight out of the big blind. Ace King, I would have 3-bet there. Would have gone a bigger size, probably to 140, as it doesn't really play that well post flop. Jack 3 off. I would have liked to see myself raise the Jack 3, but I don't mind folding. It's pretty plays pretty poorly post flop. And at this point, he's almost dropping below 50% out of position. So, that's the very, very bottom of my range. So I'll go ahead and fold it. But I think from here on out, I really would like to see myself opening 100%. This is a decent spot for me to check raise bluff. If I had the king of clubs, I would be much more inclined to check raise bluff with the king high backdoor flush draw and the backdoor straight draw. Um, However, given the game flow in this particular situation, I decided to go ahead and fold. 10-2 off. I think I ended up folding that. I would have liked to see myself raise there. As I said, he's being too exploitable by folding his big blind too often that I just need to be raising 100%. So I think that fold there with 10-2 off was a mistake. Jack 8 offsuit, we get 3-bet. Pretty easy flat. We do, even though his 3-bet range is so strong, Jack 8 fares pretty well against hands like Ace King and Ace Queen and King Queen and stuff like that. We can realize our equity pretty easily on the flop, and then just go from there. We end up getting 5-6-6 paired flop um, with two spades, so we miss it pretty hard. Um, he makes a full pot C bet, and I think this is a spot where his range is just really way too strong. We don't have any fold equity. We don't have any equity. It's just I think anything besides folding is a spew here. Two five offsuit, bottom of my range. I'll be folding. I would fold if he men raised as well. 3-6 off. I'd like to see myself 3x here. Encourage as many folds as possible. The hand doesn't play that great. And he's continuing to fold his big blind a lot. All right, so he limps. The one time we saw him limp, which was 2 matches ago, well, we saw him limp queens twice. So I'm a little bit wary of his limp, but with pocket eights, I'm still going to make a small raise. It ends up folding, so he must have had a pretty weak hand there. Ace 10 suited, I go back and forth between flatting and 3-betting. I think I usually 3-bet it and usually flat Ace 10 offsuit. I think it's good for a 3-bet. There's enough worse hands that are calling and it plays well enough post flop. Um, he calls, and we end up flopping flush draw with one over to the board. Um, I think this is a spot where I would bet probably a little more than a third pot C bet with my entire range. This board is dry enough that it misses both of us pretty often. That a small C bet like that is all you need to. I think it accomplishes the same thing as a C bet to 180 basically. And he clicks it back on us, which. Given what we've seen before from his click it backs, I'm not giving it a ton of credit. Um, I think it could definitely be some King X, although I expect a lot of his King X to go a little bit bigger. That I think there's a slight possibility that we're just getting bluffed here, and then it could be like some frustrated 8X type hands, and then it could also be flush draws a lot, I think. Um, but I think there's probably less. I really expect him to be going bigger with his King X based on what we've seen so far. Um, so I'm gonna put it weight his range towards a lot of weaker hands, and because I basically don't, the only showdown value I have right now is my ace high. I want to encourage him to fold as much as possible. I want him to fold his 8x. I want him to fold his 3x. So I think just overbet jamming here is going to be the best option. I wouldn't mind a not all-in raise and then jamming any turn either. I think that's an okay option too, and gives you a lot of fold equity. He ends up folding 10-5 off. I'd really like to see myself raise. I'm really frustrated that I haven't started opening 100% versus this guy as few hands as he's playing out of position. It's really missing out on some AV by stealing his big blind because he's not fighting for it at all. We flop middle pair, um, standard half pot C bet. We want to get calls from worse draws, 3x, 4x. On the turn, the 8 is kind of meaningless card, but at this point, I think his range is pretty weak. I think um, he's got a little bit of Queen X, although I expect him to check raise a lot of that on this flop. Um, and then he's got a lot of 3x and 4x, and then 5, 6, a hand like Ace 2, Ace 5. And we're actually ahead of a lot of those hands, and they make up a pretty decent portion of his range. So I think a barrel here for value is going to be the best. He ends up folding. And he's only opening 47% of hands so far as well too. So there's no need for me to play a lot of hands from the big blind because he's folding his small blind more than 50% of the time. So it's a pretty big fundamental leak um, by him. Bottom of my range, go ahead and fold. We'll raise the ace jack to 70, and we get a call. Um, Somewhat connected flop. Um, he calls our C bet, and we get a 9 of hearts on the turn. Um, so his range for calling the flop is going to be 10x, 7x, 8, 9, 5, 6. Um, Maybe a hand like Jack 9 or Jack 8. Um, all those hands picked up equity here. Um, However, we picked up some equity as well with our gut shot straight draw, and we still have 2 overs to the board. Although our jack um, might not be clean, meaning if we hit the jack, there's a lot of 8x in his range that's going to get there. So that's not really as much of an out as the ace or the 8 is. Um, However, um, I think he still has a lot of 4x and weak 7x, like a hand like a7. A hand like a7 would fold to a barrel here. Um, and also, if he does call a barrel here, I think we might have the opportunity to bluff him on certain rivers, like a king or a queen river. I think we could bluff him off a lot of hands. So I think a barrel here is going to be best and leaves us with most options for the river. We barrel right around half pot, and he does end up folding. 7-10 suited should have great expectation flatting. Min raise out of position at the stack size. We get a really dry paired flop. He see bets full pot. I think it's best spot to just give up with our 10 high. Bluffing is a little too transparent on a flop like that, especially with 10 high. Go ahead and do a half pot C bet. Try and fold out any air he may have had that missed the flop. He ends up calling, and we bank a king, and then he donks out, which is really interesting. I have not seen this type of play from him yet. So I'm kind of at a loss for what his range is. Um, Although I do expect it to be a lot of ace X. I think a lot of people play ace X this way, like ace X without a heart. Like because they're afraid of the fourth heart coming in and making the easy flush. So they're basically like trying to protect their hand. They don't want me to check back. Um, because I really don't think he would play 5x or 8x this way. So I'm weighting his range to a lot of 8x and then some draws, and he may even have the made flush. So I think I have to call here, being that I hit my king. However, I expect to be behind a decent amount of the time. And river brings in the flush, and he checks. Um, so given what we put his range on before, this makes for a pretty good bluff spot, where we can bluff him off king X or ace X because of the way he played the turn. That I really do think a lot of players would play a hand like um, ace five of clubs that way, because they're protecting, because they figure they should have the best hand most of the time, but the flush can easily come in and counterfeit their hand, and they don't want that to happen, so they're trying to protect. So basically, by him playing that way and giving me information about his hand, and then checking this river, he's saying that he doesn't have he doesn't have very many hearts in his range. So I think this is a decent spot for me to bluff. Um, I think if I check back, I'm going to lose to ace high. I mean, I'm sorry, a pair of aces a lot of the time. I don't remember what I ended up doing here. I'd like to see myself bluff. Looks like I'm going in for it. And I do. And it works. So I like that play. I think as an example, yet another example of him turning his hand face up and being exploited because of it. That's why you have to put. That's why it's important for you to think about, your bet sizings. You know, do you bet the same size with your bluffs that you do for value in certain spots? Because if you don't, then you're being exploitable, and there's nothing wrong with being exploitable. You have to be exploitable in order to exploit somebody, but you just need to be aware that that's what you're doing and that it is exploitable, and you need to be aware of the skill level of the player that you're playing. Is he capable of picking up on the fact that I'm changing my sizings, and is he capable of using it against me? Um, because if you're unaware of that stuff, you're just burning money and not even realizing it. Um, so he clicks it back on us again, with the king three. Um, I see this one is a little bit stronger than the last one, and my hand is a lot weaker. That I'm just going to go ahead and flat and try and take a flop, and probably not going to fight too hard after that. We completely missed. Pretty easy fold. I think anything else is probably pretty spewy. It's interesting that he seems to be. It's probably just variance that he's calling a little bit more out of position now than he was. So he check calls this flop and then leads the turn half pot. I really expected to be a lot of frustrated ace high and king high. Maybe, yeah, like a hand like ace two or ace five. Um, I'm expecting to be, or king two or king five, something like that. And versus that range with jack high and behind. Um, and although this is one of those boards where it seems like neither one of us should have a hand, so I should win it because I'm in position. Um, I think that the risk reward isn't really there with Jack High, and I think the best play is just to fold. Even though we feel like, it feels like you're just kind of getting pushed out. But if he's capable of doing that with ace high and king high, and you're calling with jack high, then that's a mistake. He's basically value owning you with his ace high, and you don't want that to happen. So he c bets half pot, and we just go ahead and check call. I think check raising is a little bit thin, but not too bad because King X is always going to be calling you, and you're going to get it in versus some worse Ace X. So I wouldn't have minded to see a check raise there because stacks are getting a little shorter now. But check call I think is fine also. We turn two pair. It's one of those spots we don't want to lead and turn our hand face up. If he has a hand that we're going to get stacks in against, like Ace 10 or Ace Jack, all those hands are going to be value betting anyway. So there's no need to turn our hand face up and think that um, we're not doing ourselves any favors by leading here. If he has a hand that's stacking off, it's going to be barreling. So he barrels half pot, which I'm not very excited about because I think he's not going to barrel the river very often. I think his hand is pretty weak. That I think a river lead here would probably be best because I think he would actually check back his, and I've actually seen him play Ace 9 on a very similar board and check back the river, where he would definitely be calling a lead. So I think leading something like a little over half pot here is going to be our best option. And I think we get called by a lot of Ace X and King X. He ended up having Ace 6, so well played on both parts, I'd say. All right, so we're getting down a little bit shorter now, stack wise, and I'm a little unsure of how he responds at these stack sizes. I usually go off their stats, but that can be a little dangerous because people tend to change the way they play once they get down shorter like this. Here we limped, he raised, he min raised, and we called, and now he's potting the flop. Unfortunately, we have an okay backdoor straight draw, but I think we just don't have enough equity to continue, and it doesn't look like we have any fold equity either. So I think anything but folding there is maybe a little bit spewy. I still would like to see myself continuing to raise and not limping very much, putting the pressure on him and giving the taking advantage of all that fold equity that we seem to have when he's in the big blind. Getting a lot of really good hands at the end here. This is a really standard shove. We probably don't have any fold equity, so hopefully getting it in to get it's a worse hand. It's a great hand for him to have. Doesn't have very much equity. And we hold. All right, so that about sums it up for the video. Looks like he ended up continuing with the same style that he started with, even after he was being exploited by turning his hand face up. He wasn't aware of the fact that he was being exploitable or that he was being exploited. So he continued with the same bet sizing tells and continued going right on with that, and it worked out to our advantage. Um, so I look forward to you guys making some comments in the comments box. Hopefully, I can learn something from you guys, and you guys can learn something from me. Thanks for watching. Bye.